Welcome back to Nocturnal Mind. If today was hard, you made it. If today was easy, even better. Either way, you are here now. The day is done. There is nothing left to do tonight except let yourself rest. Tonight we are going to find somewhere comfortable. Somewhere you can let your body grow heavy against whatever is holding you. You don't need to follow any of this closely. You don't need to remember a single word. The ideas will come and go like light through water, and that is exactly as it should be. Just let the words arrive and let them drift past again, the way clouds move across a dark sky without asking anything of you. If today was hard, you don't need to process it right now. If there is something unresolved sitting quietly at the edge of your thoughts, you can leave it there for tonight. It will still be there in the morning if you need it. But for now, for this hour and a half or so, you don't have to carry it. We're going to spend some time tonight with a subject that has quietly fascinated people for as long as human beings have been sleeping. Which is to say, for as long as there have been human beings at all. It is the subject of waking up inside a dream, not waking from it, not escaping it, but becoming aware while still inside it that you are dreaming. It sounds simple when you say it like that, but it is one of the most extraordinary things the human mind is capable of. And tonight, slowly and gently, we're going to explore it together. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to try anything. Just rest and let the story of the dreaming mind unfold around you, soft and unhurried, the way the best nights always do. We're in no hurry at all. Imagine for a moment that you are standing in a room you have never seen before. The walls are the wrong color. The ceiling is too high. There is a door at the far end that you somehow know leads outside, even though you have never been in this building. There are people moving around you, familiar and unfamiliar at once, the way dream figures tend to be. And then, very quietly, something shifts. Not in the room. In you. A thought arrives, clear and calm, and completely out of place in the middle of this dream architecture. The thought is simply this: I am dreaming. Not as a panic, not as a revelation, just as a quiet, certain knowing. The room is still there. The people are still moving. The door is still at the far end. But now you are watching it all from a different place inside yourself. You are still in the dream, but you are also somehow awake within it. This is what researchers call a lucid dream. And before you decide it sounds like something that only happens to other people, consider this. The question that has occupied philosophers, monks, scientists, and dreamers for thousands of years is not whether this state exists. It clearly does. The question is what it actually is. What happens in the brain when the sleeping mind wakes up inside itself? What it means for our understanding of consciousness? And what, if anything, it might be used for? Those are the questions we'll carry with us tonight, gently, without urgency. The way you might carry a lantern through a dark and beautiful wood, not to illuminate everything at once, but just to see a little further with each step. There is something quietly moving in the fact that the oldest written records of human inner life already contain this idea. Long before laboratories, long before electrodes and brain scans and the careful language of neuroscience, people were writing about the moment of waking up inside a dream. The Indian Upanishads, some of the earliest philosophical texts in human history, composed and passed down through oral tradition from around 1,000 years before the Common Era, contain passages that speak of a state of dreaming awareness, a state in which the self observes the dream from a place of knowing. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition took this understanding and built an entire practice around it, what they called dream yoga, which began to be formalized around the 8th century, was a set of meditative disciplines designed to bring the practitioner to a state of conscious awareness within the dream, not simply for the pleasure of it, not for the novelty, but was a genuine spiritual path. The reasoning was elegant and, in its way, very ancient. If you can become aware inside a dream, aware that what surrounds you is a construction of the mind and not an independent reality, then perhaps you can begin to see the waking world in a similar light. Perhaps the boundaries between dreaming and waking are not as solid as they appear. Tibetan monks who pursued dream yoga would spend years cultivating this awareness. They would go to sleep with intention. They would train themselves to recognize the textures of the dream state. And when they found themselves inside a dream, they would attempt to remain stable within it, to resist the pull of the dream narrative, and to simply observe. What they were doing, though they would not have described it this way, was training the prefrontal cortex to remain partially active during REM sleep. They were, in a very real neurological sense, practicing what researchers would not confirm with instruments for another 12 centuries. In the West, the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote something in the 4th century before the Common Era that is quite beautiful in its precision. He observed in a treatise on sleep and dreaming that when one is asleep, there is something in consciousness which declares that what then presents itself is but a dream. He was describing, in the philosophical language of his time, exactly what we now call lucid dreaming. The awareness that the experience one is having is a dream arising from within the dream itself. Aristotle did not have a word for it. He simply noticed it and wrote it down and moved on. St. Augustine, writing in the 4th century of the Common Era, recorded what appears to be an early account of the same phenomenon. A physician named Gennadius, who was reportedly uncertain about the existence of an afterlife, had a dream in which a young man appeared to him and led him to a city where he heard music of extraordinary beauty. The following night, the same young man appeared and asked whether Gennadius recognized him from the night before. He did. The young man then asked whether this was happening in sleep or in waking life. Gennadius replied that it was in sleep. The young man suggested that this proved the existence of a kind of awareness that could operate independently. For centuries after that, the idea drifted through spiritual and philosophical writing without ever quite being pinned down or examined systematically. People knew the experience, many had had it, but there was no common language for it, no shared framework, and no way to study it rigorously. It lived in the space between sleep and waking, acknowledged but unexplained. That began to change in the 19th century, in a rather remarkable way. In France, the Marquis de Hervé de Saint-Denis was a French scholar whose primary expertise was in Chinese language and culture. He was a sinologist, a translator, a man of considerable academic standing. But from the age of 13, he had also been keeping a meticulous dream journal. Night after night, year after year, he wrote down his dreams in careful detail. And what he noticed over the course of more than 20 years of this practice was that the act of recording dreams with such consistency had gradually changed his relationship to them. He had begun to become aware more and more frequently. By the time he published his findings in 1867, he had accumulated an extraordinary body of personal data. He published anonymously, perhaps aware that a French academic writing about the inner life of his dreams might not be taken entirely seriously. The title of the work, translated into English, was something like Dreams and the Ways to Direct Them. Saint-Denis described experiments he had conducted on himself. He had learned to change the content of his dreams. He had learned to summon specific environments. He had developed techniques for maintaining lucidity once it arrived, rather than allowing the dream to sweep him back into ordinary unconscious narrative. He was, by any reasonable measure, one of the first Western scientists of the dreaming mind, even though the tools available to him were entirely his own subjective experience and the discipline of his pen. The word we use today, the word that has become the standard term in every language in which this subject is discussed, came a little later. It was coined in 1913 by a Dutch psychiatrist and writer named Frederik van Eden. Van Eden had been studying his own dreams for many years, and he presented a paper to the Society for Psychical Research in which he described different categories of dreaming. The clearest and most interesting category, he said, was what he called the lucid dream. And he was careful to explain what he meant by lucid. He did not mean a dream that was visually clear or particularly vivid. He meant a dream in which the dreamer had insight. That distinction is worth sitting with for a moment, because it points to something important. A lucid dream is not simply a very detailed dream or a very memorable one. It is a dream in which a particular kind of self-awareness has switched on. Something in the dreaming mind has recognized itself. And that recognition, that quiet internal light, is what makes it so fascinating. For most of the 20th century, despite the rich history of personal accounts and philosophical reflection, lucid dreaming occupied an awkward position in the scientific world. It was the kind of thing that serious researchers tended to regard with gentle skepticism. The subjective reports were interesting, certainly. But how could you verify them? The problem was not one of disbelief exactly. It was one of methodology. Science works best when it can measure things. And consciousness, particularly consciousness occurring inside a sleeping brain, seemed stubbornly resistant to measurement. Then, in 1975, at the University of Hull in England, a young psychologist named Keith Hearn had an idea. He knew that during REM sleep, the stage of sleep most associated with vivid dreaming, the body is largely paralyzed. This is a protective mechanism, presumably evolved to prevent people from physically acting out their dreams. The muscles are essentially switched off. He found a volunteer named Alan Worsley. Worsley was an experienced dreamer who reported having lucid dreams with some regularity. The arrangement was simple. When Worsley found himself inside a lucid dream, he would move his eyes in a specific pattern. Left, right, left, right. A pattern that would be meaningless as a spontaneous movement, but unmistakable as a deliberate signal. Worsley went to sleep in the laboratory, wired to an electro-oculograph, a device that measures eye movements through electrodes placed near the eyes. Hearn watched the readout through the night. And then, in the early hours of the morning, it happened. The pen traces on the recording paper moved in the unmistakable pattern. Left, right, deliberate, repeated. A message sent from inside a dream. It was, in the most literal sense, a signal from the other side of sleep. Objective, measurable, undeniable proof that a sleeping person had been conscious enough to remember a prearranged plan, recognize that they were dreaming, and execute a voluntary motor signal. All while their body lay asleep, their brain waves showing the characteristic patterns of REM sleep. Hearn's finding was extraordinary. And yet, for reasons that remain somewhat puzzling in retrospect, it did not immediately transform the scientific world's understanding of dreaming. His results were not widely publicized. They did not appear in the major journals. They sat, quietly recorded, waiting for the world to catch up. That wider recognition came through a different path. On the other side of the Atlantic, a few years later, Stephen LaBerge was a psychologist at Stanford University in California. He had been interested in lucid dreaming since his youth and had developed a remarkable ability to induce them in himself at will. He was also, crucially, determined to study them with the full rigor of modern neuroscience. Working in the Stanford Sleep Laboratory in the late 1970s and early 1980s, he independently developed the same eye movement signaling method that Hearn had used, apparently without knowledge of the earlier work. LaBerge performed lucid dreams in the laboratory himself, signaling his own moments of lucidity through prearranged eye movement patterns while connected to polysomnography equipment that recorded not just his eye movements but his brainwaves, heart rate, and muscle activity. The recordings were unambiguous. He was asleep, he was in REM sleep, and he was conscious. He published his findings. He founded the Lucidity Institute at Stanford. He began training other people to have lucid dreams and studying them in the laboratory. And he spent the next several decades developing what became the most comprehensive scientific program of lucid dream research the world had seen. There is a small but telling detail in the history of LaBerge's early work that speaks to the resistance this subject initially encountered in the scientific establishment. He submitted one of his early papers to the journal Science, one of the most prestigious scientific publications in the world. It was rejected. Not because the methodology was flawed, not because the data was unconvincing, but because the data was unconvincing, but because a reviewer stated, essentially, that conscious awareness within a dream was impossible, and therefore the paper could not be correct. It is a reminder that even science, which is at its best when it follows the evidence wherever it leads, can sometimes be held back by the limits of what its practitioners are willing to imagine. LaBerge kept working. The evidence accumulated. And gradually, the skepticism softened. What LaBerge and his colleagues at Stanford went on to demonstrate over the following years was a detailed portrait of the lucid dreaming brain that has only grown richer and more nuanced as the instruments available to researchers have improved. They showed that lucid dreams occurred predominantly during REM sleep, particularly in the longer REM periods that cluster in the later hours of the night. They showed that the physiological state of the body during a lucid dream was different from ordinary dreaming, with elevated heart rate, elevated respiration, and increased density of the rapid eye movements that give REM sleep its name. They showed that time, as experienced within a lucid dream, moved at roughly the same. That finding is quietly astonishing. Think about it for a moment as you lie there in the dark. The dreaming brain, when it is aware of itself, experiences the passage of time in much the same way as the waking brain does. Whatever is happening in the lucid dream state, it is not a compressed or distorted version of normal consciousness. It is something much closer to waking awareness, somehow sustained inside a sleeping brain. The question of what actually happens in the brain during a lucid dream is one that researchers have been working to answer with increasing precision over the past few decades. And what they have found is both technically fascinating and, in a quieter way, deeply beautiful. Lucid dreaming, as it turns out, is not simply waking up. It is not the brain switching from one state to another. It is something more subtle and more interesting than that. It is the brain holding two states simultaneously. During ordinary REM sleep, the brain is highly active. This might seem counterintuitive since the body is deeply asleep and the person is entirely unresponsive to the outside world. But inside the skull, the situation is quite different. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that sits behind your forehead. It is the region most associated with what we might call the higher functions of thought. Self-reflection, decision-making, the ability to evaluate a situation and compare it to past experience, the awareness of oneself as a self moving through time with a history and a future. In ordinary REM sleep, the prefrontal cortex is notably quieter than it is during waking. This is thought to be part of why ordinary dreams have the quality they do. They feel real while they are happening, but they are often illogical, shifting, inconsistent. In a lucid dream, that changes. Research using EEG, and later using the much more spatially precise technique of functional magnetic resonance imaging, has shown that during lucid dreaming, the prefrontal cortex becomes significantly more active. Not as active as in full waking consciousness, but considerably more active than in ordinary dreaming. The light switches back on, partially. And with it comes the capacity for self-reflection, for evaluation, for the quiet internal voice that says. A study published in the journal Sleep in 2012 looked at the neural correlates of dream lucidity by comparing brain activity during lucid and non-lucid REM sleep in the same subjects. The researchers identified heightened activity in several specific regions during the lucid periods. All of these regions share something in common. They are all involved, in different ways, with the experience of being a self that is aware of itself. They are the neural architecture of self-consciousness. And in a lucid dream, they are more active than in ordinary dreaming. There is a paper from 2025, written by Sawatay Demirel and Benjamin Baird, and published in the Journal of Neuroscience, that describes lucid dreaming as a state of widespread communication across brain regions. The picture that emerges from this and other recent research is of a dreaming brain that has, during lucidity, established new lines of communication between its various parts. Scientists sometimes call it a hybrid state, a blend of REM sleep and waking awareness existing simultaneously in the same brain at the same moment. It is as if two different kinds of music are playing in the same space, and instead of creating noise, they create something new. Something that has qualities of both but is not quite either. There is a particular type of brainwave that seems to be especially important in this hybrid state. Gamma waves are the fastest of the main brainwave frequencies, oscillating at above 30 cycles per second. In waking life, bursts of gamma activity are associated with moments of concentrated awareness, with the binding together of different streams of perception into a unified conscious experience. When researchers have looked at the brainwave signatures of lucid dreaming using EEG, they have found elevated gamma activity, particularly in the frontal and frontotemporal regions of the brain. There is a study from Frankfurt, from researchers working with Ursula Voss, that found something beautiful in this pattern. They were able to use a technique called transcranial alternating current stimulation to apply gentle electrical oscillations to the scalps of sleeping volunteers at the gamma frequency. And what they found was that this gentle external nudge toward gamma activity increased the frequency of lucid dreaming in their subjects. The brain, it seemed, could be encouraged toward the hybrid state by a soft external prompt, a gentle reminder at the frequency of awareness. The Max Planck Institute of Psychiatry contributed another remarkable piece of evidence to this picture. In a 2011 study, researchers used functional MRI to observe what happened in the brains of lucid dreamers when they performed specific physical actions within their dreams. The action chosen was simple: clenching the hand into a fist. Subjects were asked, while in a verified lucid dream state, to clench their dream hand in a specific rhythm. The fMRI images showed activity in the motor cortex, the part of the brain that controls physical movement, in precisely the pattern that would be expected if the subject were actually clenching their real hand. The brain, in other words, does not clearly distinguish between a real physical action and a consciously willed dream action. When you clench your fist in a lucid dream, the same neural machinery activates as when you clench your fist at the breakfast table. The only difference is that in the dream, the signal never makes it to the muscles because the body's motor pathways are switched off during REM sleep. The intention is real. The neural activity is real. This finding has implications that reach far beyond the study of dreaming. It suggests that the boundary between imagination and action in the brain is considerably thinner than we tend to assume. And it opens a door to thinking about what it might mean to rehearse something, to practice something, to work through something inside the safety of a dream. Throughout history, there have been people who have cultivated the ability to become lucid in their dreams with remarkable consistency. Not as a laboratory experiment, not as a spiritual discipline, but simply as a skill. They developed through practice, through curiosity, through the quiet discipline of paying attention to their own inner life. The techniques that have been developed for inducing lucid dreams are, in their way, quite elegant. They work by creating habits of mind that gradually carry over from the waking state into the dream state. And because they involve nothing more than attention and intention, they are available to anyone who wants to try them. The most fundamental of these techniques is something called reality testing or reality checking. The idea is simple. During the waking day, you periodically ask yourself a genuine question. Am I dreaming? Not as a rhetorical exercise, not as a joke, but as a real inquiry. You look at your hands and notice whether they look normal. You try to read a piece of text and notice whether the words stay stable when you look away and look back. You check a clock and see whether the time makes sense. In waking life, these checks will always confirm that you are awake. But the act of performing them regularly, of making them a genuine habit, means that in a dream, text tends to change when you look away and look back. Numbers on clocks tend to be wrong or to shift. Hands may have too many fingers or too few. The light switch may not work. These are not universal rules because dreams are endlessly variable, but they are tendencies. And if you have trained yourself to notice these things during the day, you are more likely to notice these things during the day, you are more likely to notice them at night. The German psychologist Paul Foley, working in the 1970s and 80s, developed what he called the reflection technique, which was essentially an early and highly systematic version of reality testing. Foley was interested in lucid dreaming both as a scientific phenomenon and as a tool for psychological self-exploration, and he brought a rigorous empirical approach to the question of how it could be reliably induced. He kept detailed records of his own experiences and those of his students, and he developed a comprehensive psychological model of the lucid dreaming state that remains influential today. Stephen LaBerge at Stanford developed what is probably the most widely used and most scientifically studied technique for inducing lucid dreams. He called it MILD, which stands for Mnemonic Induction of Lucid Dreams. The word mnemonic is important here. The technique works through memory and intention, not through any external device or substance. The basic method involves waking up during the night, typically after about 5 or 6 hours of sleep, when REM periods are longest and most frequent. You spend a short time reviewing the dream you just had, identifying specific details and images. And then, as you drift back to sleep, you hold a clear intention in mind. The intention is simply this: the next time I am dreaming, I will recognize that I am dreaming. You repeat this to yourself as you fall asleep, and you hold the image of yourself becoming lucid in whatever dream environment you find yourself in. The technique works, to the extent that it does, through a mechanism that is actually quite familiar in everyday life. We all know the experience of setting an intention before sleep and finding that it influences our behavior in the morning. You decide the night before that you will wake up at a certain time, and often you do, even before the alarm sounds. You tell yourself you need to remember something important, and it surfaces in your mind in the morning. The sleeping brain is not entirely cut off from the intentions of the waking mind. The wait back to bed method, often abbreviated to WBTB, works on a slightly different principle. It takes advantage of the architecture of sleep itself. REM sleep is not evenly distributed through the night. The first REM period of the night is typically short, perhaps 10 or 15 minutes. But as the night progresses, the REM periods grow longer and more frequent until in the last hours before waking, much of the sleep is spent in REM. If you want to maximize your chances of having a lucid dream, you want to be in one of the WBTB method achieves this by setting an alarm for about 5 or 6 hours after you fall asleep. You wake up, get out of bed, and spend 30 minutes to an hour in a state of mild wakefulness. You might read about lucid dreaming, think about your recent dreams, practice some MILD. Then you go back to sleep. Because you are entering sleep from a state of relative alertness, and because you are entering it at a time when REM sleep is abundant, you are considerably more likely to find yourself in a long, rich REM period with enough cognitive activity to tip into lucidity. These techniques are not guaranteed. They require patience and consistency. Many people practice for weeks or months before having their first clear lucid dream, but the research suggests that with sustained effort, they work. And they are, in their essence, simply ways of training the mind to pay attention to itself, even in the deepest places of sleep. Dream journals deserve particular mention here, because they are both the simplest and, in some ways, the most important of all the tools available to someone who wants to explore their dreaming life. The act of writing down your dreams immediately upon waking, before the memories dissolve in the light of the morning, does several things at once. It improves your ability to recall dreams, which tends to be poor in most people, not because they don't dream, but because the memories are fragile and easily lost. It builds a picture of your personal dream landscape, the recurring locations, characters, themes, and images that tend to appear in your dreams. These are what researchers call dream signs, and the Marquis de Hervé de Saint-Denis, that 19th century French scholar who kept his dream journal for decades, understood this intuitively. His meticulous record-keeping was not just documentation. It was a practice of attention. And it was that practice, sustained over years, that gradually transformed his relationship to his own dreaming mind. There is a question that arises naturally when you spend time with the science and history of lucid dreaming. It is the question of what it is for. Not what it is, neurologically or phenomenologically, but what it does. What it offers. What a person might actually do with the capacity to wake up inside their own dream. The answers are more varied and more practically significant than you might expect. The most widely discussed therapeutic application of lucid dreaming is in the treatment of nightmares, and particularly the kind of recurrent, intrusive nightmares that are associated with post-traumatic stress. It is estimated that around 96% of people with diagnosed PTSD experience vivid nightmares. These are not simply unpleasant dreams. They are full re-experiences of traumatic events, arriving night after night with the force and vividness of reality. They disrupt sleep. Lucid dreaming offers something remarkable for these individuals. Because a lucid dreamer knows they are dreaming, they can, in principle, change their relationship to what is happening in the dream. They do not have to be swept along by the nightmare narrative. They can observe it from a slightly different place. Research into this application is still developing, and the results are not yet uniform. Not everyone who has PTSD can easily learn to lucid dream, and not every lucid dream provides the hoped-for relief. But the evidence that exists is encouraging. Studies have shown that lucid dreaming training can reduce nightmare frequency and distress in some individuals. And clinicians working in this area report accounts of people who have found genuine relief through the practice, who have been able to revisit traumatic dream scenarios with a new kind of agency, and who have found that this changed their relationship not just to the nightmares, but to the underlying. There is something deeply meaningful in this. The idea that within the space of a dream, a person might find not helplessness but agency, not re-traumatization but the beginning of a different story. Anxiety, more broadly, is another area where lucid dreaming shows promise. The dream state offers a kind of safe rehearsal space, a place where feared situations can be approached and explored without real-world consequences. Someone who fears public speaking might, in a lucid dream, stand before an audience and discover that they can manage it. Someone who is anxious about a difficult conversation might rehearse that conversation in the dream, trying different approaches, noticing their own emotional responses. The brain's tendency to process dream actions with the same neural activity as real actions means that this rehearsal. Grief has its own relationship with dreaming that deserves a quiet mention here. Many people who have lost someone they loved report dreaming of that person. Sometimes these dreams are painful. Sometimes they are comforting. And some people who have developed lucid dreaming skills have found that they can use the dream state to reconnect in some form with those they have lost. To have conversations that were not possible in life. To say things that were not possible in life. To simply spend time in the presence of a dreamed version of someone they miss. This is not the same as believing that the dead are literally present in the dream. It is something more subtle than that. The dreaming mind constructs its characters from memory, from love, from the deep accumulation of everything we knew about a person. and the character it constructs can be, for the griever, a genuine source of comfort. A way of continuing a relationship that has been interrupted. A way of processing loss in a space where the ordinary rules of time and presence do not apply. Creativity is another dimension of this. Many artists, writers, musicians, and scientists have spoken about the role of dreaming in their creative work. The dream state, with its freedom from the constraints of logic and convention, has always been a space where unexpected connections are made, where problems are approached from unfamiliar angles, where the mind finds solutions it could not reach through ordinary waking thought. Lucid dreaming, which adds conscious agency to this already fertile state, can amplify these creative possibilities considerably. A lucid dreamer can choose to direct the dream toward a particular question. There is a lovely image in this. The dreaming mind is vast and patient and endlessly inventive. The waking mind is focused and purposeful and capable of direction. In a lucid dream, both are present at once. And what they can create together in that quiet space behind the sleeping eyes is something that neither could quite manage alone. Keith Hearne, the British psychologist who first proved the existence of lucid dreaming through his work with Alan Worsley in 1975, did not stop with that discovery. He was interested in the practical question of whether it was possible to help people become lucid from the outside, whether some kind of external signal delivered at the right moment during REM sleep could act as a gentle prompt to the dreaming brain, nudging it toward awareness without waking it entirely. He developed what he called the dream machine. It was a device that monitored the sleeper's breathing, using changes in respiratory pattern as a proxy for REM sleep, and delivered a mild stimulus when those patterns suggested the sleeper was dreaming. The stimulus could be a small electric shock to the wrist or a sound. The idea was that the stimulus would be incorporated into the dream or would simply raise the sleeper's level of awareness enough to tip them into lucidity without pulling them all the way back to waking. The results were promising but inconsistent. The technology available to Hearne in the late 1970s was limited, and detecting REM sleep reliably through breathing patterns alone was imprecise. But the principle was sound, and it pointed toward a line of research that continues to the present day. Stephen LaBerge, working at Stanford in the 1980s and 90s, developed a more sophisticated version of this idea. His device, which he called the Nova Dreamer, used electrodes to detect the characteristic eye movements of REM sleep directly, rather than relying on breathing as a proxy. When REM was detected, the device would deliver a gentle flashing light through the wearer's closed eyelids. The light was typically incorporated into the dream as a visual cue, and experienced lucid dreamers could learn to recognize this cue and use it as a trigger for lucidity. The Nova Dreamer was sold commercially and used by thousands of people. It was not a guarantee of lucid dreaming, and it worked better for some people than for others. But it demonstrated that the principle of external cueing during REM sleep was practically viable, and it brought the possibility of assisted lucid dreaming to a much wider audience than laboratory research alone could reach. More recent research has focused on acoustic cues, which are easier to deliver precisely and have fewer of the practical complications associated with light-based devices. The acoustic cues work, it is believed, by providing a gentle elevation of arousal during REM sleep, not enough to wake the sleeper, but enough to shift the balance of brain activity slightly toward the waking end of the spectrum, increasing the likelihood that the prefrontal cortex will become active enough to generate the self-awareness that defines lucidity. A soft knock on the door of consciousness from the outside. The Frankfurt study that used transcranial alternating current stimulation to apply gamma frequency. Electrical oscillations to sleeping subjects took this idea to its most technically sophisticated form. Rather than delivering an external sensory stimulus and hoping it would influence the brain's electrical activity, this approach directly applied electrical oscillations at the frequency associated with conscious awareness. And it worked. Subjects who received gamma-frequency stimulation during REM sleep reported significantly more lucid dreams than those who received stimulation at other frequencies or no stimulation at all. These technological approaches raise interesting questions about the future of lucid dreaming research and practice. If it becomes possible to reliably induce lucid dreams through non-invasive external stimulation, what might that mean for therapeutic applications? Could a clinician working with someone suffering from recurrent nightmares use acoustic or electrical cues to help that person achieve lucidity during a nightmare episode, giving them the awareness they need to change the dream narrative? Could an athlete use assisted lucid dreaming to rehearse a competition in the vivid neural reality of the dream state, knowing that the brain processes the rehearsed actions with the same activity as real ones? These are questions that researchers are beginning to take seriously. The tools are becoming more refined. The understanding of the underlying neuroscience is deepening, and the gap between the ancient practice of dream yoga and the modern sleep laboratory is narrowing slowly and gently with each new study. There is something honest and important in pausing to acknowledge how much remains unknown. Science is at its most trustworthy when it is clear about the limits of what it has established, and the science of lucid dreaming, for all its richness, still has many open questions. The most fundamental of these is the question of mechanism. We know that lucid dreaming involves increased activity in the prefrontal cortex and associated regions. We know that gamma-frequency brainwaves are elevated. We know that it is a hybrid state, neither fully waking nor fully sleeping. But we do not yet have a complete account of how lucidity is triggered. What exactly is the neural event that causes the dreaming brain to become aware of itself? Is it a threshold effect where activity in the prefrontal regions crosses some critical level? Is it the result of a particular pattern of communication between brain regions? Is there a specific moment, The relationship between lucid dreaming and overall sleep quality is another area of genuine uncertainty. For most people, an occasional lucid dream appears to have no negative effect on the restorative functions of sleep. But some researchers have raised the question of whether frequent lucid dreaming, particularly if it involves sustained effortful consciousness during what would otherwise be restful REM sleep, might in some cases reduce the quality of sleep's restorative effects. This is not a settled question. The evidence is mixed and the individual variability is large. But it is a question worth holding in mind. There are also intriguing reports, not yet fully understood, of lucid dreams occurring not during REM sleep, but during the lighter stages of NREM sleep, the stages known as N1 and N2. These occur at the transition into sleep and in the lighter phases of the sleep cycle. The question of individual differences is also largely unexplored. Why are some people natural lucid dreamers who have the experience frequently and effortlessly, while others practice for years without achieving reliable lucidity? There are some hints in the research that people who tend toward metacognitive awareness in waking life, who are generally more reflective and self-observant, may find lucid dreaming easier. There may also be genetic factors, though these have not been systematically studied. The full picture of who lucid dreams and why is still being assembled. And then there is the deeper question, the one that sits at the edge of everything else. What does lucid dreaming tell us about consciousness itself? If the brain can generate genuine self-awareness while the body is asleep and the person is disconnected from the external world, what does that say about the nature of awareness? Is consciousness something that requires sensory input, or can it arise from within the brain's own activity? Is the self something that is constructed moment by moment, or is there something more continuous and persistent underlying it? These are not questions that neuroscience alone can answer. They are questions that reach into philosophy, into the oldest traditions of human reflection on the nature of mind. And the fact that a sleeping brain, in the right circumstances, can wake up inside a dream and know that it is dreaming is one of the most interesting pieces of evidence we have about what consciousness actually is. It is somewhere in the quiet middle of the night as these words reach you. Or perhaps it is the early hours, that particular stillness that belongs to no part of the day. There is something that tends to happen when you spend time thinking about dreaming. The mind grows softer around the edges. The boundary between thought and image becomes a little more permeable. The ideas begin to drift rather than march, and the words begin to feel less like information and more like weather. Think for a moment about the Tibetan monks who practiced dream yoga in the 8th century. Who went to sleep each night with the quiet intention of remaining aware inside their dreams? Who woke night after night inside a landscape entirely constructed by their own minds and learned to move through it with something like grace? They did not have EEG machines. They did not have polysomnography or functional MRI. They had only their own minds and a long, patient practice of attention. And yet, what they were doing, we now understand, was training the same neural circuits that Keith Hearn's electrooculograph captured in 1975. The same circuits that Lebesgue studied at Stanford. The same gamma-frequency activity that researchers in Frankfurt were able to induce with electrical stimulation more than 1,000 years later. The monks and the machines were looking at the same thing from different directions. Both found something real. There is a researcher in the story of this subject whose name appears only briefly, but whose contribution was profound. It is hard not to find something moving in that image. A man asleep, sending a message. The instruments recording the signal. And on the other side of the room, Keith Hearn watching the pen move and understanding that the world had just changed, quietly in the middle of the night. The science of dreaming has a way of doing that. Of changing things quietly, without announcement, in the small hours when the rest of the world is not paying attention. Consider what we have touched on tonight. The ancient Indian texts that described dreaming awareness 3,000 years ago. The Tibetan monks who turned it into a spiritual practice. Aristotle noticing it in passing in the 4th century before the Common Era. A French sinologist keeping a dream journal for 20 years and gradually teaching himself to direct his own dreams. A Dutch psychiatrist coining the word lucid and giving the experience a name. A British psychologist and his volunteer sending the first verified signal from inside a dream. A Stanford researcher performing his own lucid dreams in a laboratory and building an entire science around the experience. All of it points to the same thing. And sometimes, in those right circumstances, it wakes up inside itself and knows. The brain that is doing that right now, the one resting behind your closed eyes or growing heavy towards sleep as these words drift past, is the same kind of brain that Worsley had. The same kind of brain that the Tibetan monks had. The same kind of brain that has been dreaming and occasionally waking inside its dreams for as long as human beings have existed. Whatever you dream tonight, it will be yours. Entirely, privately, unmistakably yours. The world your brain builds in the dark is unlike any world that has ever existed or will exist again. It belongs to you in a way that nothing in the waking world quite does. The prefrontal cortex, that quiet region behind your forehead, will grow still as you drift towards sleep. The gamma waves will slow. The boundary between waking and dreaming will soften and dissolve. And somewhere in the long hours ahead, your dreaming mind will begin its work. Perhaps tonight, at some point in the deep reaches of your sleep, something will shift. A thought will arrive, clear and calm and quiet, from somewhere inside the dream. The thought will be simple, and it will be yours. Perhaps you will simply drift on, dreaming without knowing, which is its own kind of gift. The brain doing its ancient work of sorting and processing and healing, weaving the day's experiences into the long fabric of memory, finding connections that the waking mind was too busy to notice. Either way, you are in good hands. The sleeping brain has been doing this for a very long time. It knows the way. The day is behind you now. Whatever it held, whatever weight it carried, it has grown distant and soft, the way things do when sleep begins to arrive. The room is still. The world outside is patient and unhurried. The dark is gentle. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to remember. No signal to send, no technique to practice. Just a slow, easy drift toward whatever the night has waiting for you. Let the ideas from tonight settle somewhere quiet without asking them to mean anything in particular. The monks, the machines, the signals sent from the other side of sleep. Let them settle like leaves on still water, and let the water grow still again. And so we leave it there. The dreaming mind is ancient and patient and full of its own kind of light. Somewhere behind you, the day has already grown very distant. Let it stay there. Drift now, if you are ready. Keep well. There is a particular quality to the silence that follows a long exploration of the dreaming mind. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of something full and settled, the way a room feels after music has been playing and then gently stops. The notes are gone, but something of them remains, hanging in the air, fading so slowly you cannot quite say when they disappeared entirely. We have moved through a great deal of territory tonight, and yet, in another way, we have barely moved at all. It is worth spending a little more time there, at that edge, before the words grow too soft to follow. There is a detail from Stephen LaBerge's work at Stanford that has stayed with researchers for decades, not because it is the most technically impressive finding, but because it is the most humanly interesting. In the early years of his laboratory work, LaBerge was not only studying other people's lucid dreams, he was having them himself, regularly in the sleep laboratory, wired to instruments, contributing his own brainwaves and eye movements to the growing body of evidence. He had developed, through years of practice, an extraordinary degree of control over his dream states. And in the course of this work, he began to notice something about the quality of the lucid dream state that he found difficult to describe in purely scientific language. He described it in various interviews and writings over the years as a state of unusual clarity and presence. Not just the clarity of knowing that one is dreaming, but a kind of heightened aliveness, a sense of being more fully present than is typical even in waking life. This is a theme that appears repeatedly in the accounts of experienced lucid dreamers across cultures and centuries. The Tibetan monks who practiced dream yoga described the lucid dream state not as an inferior version of waking experience, but as a kind of enhancement of it. A state in which the mind, freed from the weight of the physical body and the constant demands of sensory input, could experience its own nature with unusual directness. Frederik van Eden, the Dutch psychiatrist who gave the experience its name, described his lucid dreams with a warmth and wonder that is quite touching to read more than a century later. He wrote about flying in his dreams, about the extraordinary vividness of the landscapes he moved through, about conversations with dream figures that seemed to him to have a depth and intelligence that seemed to him to have a depth and intelligence that surprised him. He was careful to maintain his scientific credentials, careful to distinguish between observation and interpretation. But the joy in his accounts is unmistakable. He was, quite simply, this delight is not incidental. It is, in a quiet way, one of the most important things about lucid dreaming. For most of us, sleep is something that happens to us. We go to bed, we close our eyes, and we are gone. Whatever happens in the dark is largely beyond our influence. We might have pleasant dreams or unpleasant ones. We might wake feeling rested or feeling as though we have been somewhere exhausting. Lucid dreaming changes that relationship. Not dramatically, not overnight, not for everyone, but it offers the possibility of a different kind of engagement with the hours of sleep. A possibility that the night is not simply a blank, not simply an absence, but a space with its own geography and its own possibilities. A space that, with patience and practice, can be explored rather than simply endured. This is not to suggest that ordinary non-lucid dreaming is without value. Far from it. The research on the functions of REM sleep and dreaming more broadly is rich and compelling in its own right. REM sleep is understood to play a crucial role in emotional processing, in the consolidation of memory, in the integration of new experiences with older ones. There is a theory associated with the neuroscientist Matthew Walker, among others, that REM sleep acts as a kind of overnight therapy, allowing the brain to process emotional memories in a neurochemical environment that is different from waking, one that is notably lower in the stress-associated molecule, norepinephrine. This happens whether or not you are aware of it, whether or not you remember your dreams in the morning, whether or not you have ever had a lucid dream in your life. The dreaming brain is doing this work quietly and patiently every night in every person who sleeps. It is one of the most valuable things the brain does. And it does it largely in silence, without asking for your attention or your gratitude. Lucid dreaming sits alongside this ordinary dreaming, not replacing it, not interrupting it, but sometimes offering a window into it. A moment of awareness within the process. A glimpse of the machinery while it is running. There is a concept in philosophy of mind called metacognition. It refers, broadly, to thinking about thinking. The capacity to observe one's own cognitive processes, to step back from the immediate flow of thought and notice it from a slightly wider perspective. It is a capacity that is strongly associated with the prefrontal cortex, the region that becomes more active during lucid dreaming. And it is a capacity that, in waking life, is associated with greater emotional resilience, greater flexibility of thought, and a stronger sense of psychological well-being. Lucid dreaming is, in a sense, metacognition at its most extreme. It is the mind becoming aware of its own dreaming. The observer and the observed coexisting in the same space. And the fact that this is possible, that the brain can sustain this kind of reflexive awareness even in the depths of sleep, says something remarkable about the nature of consciousness. It suggests that the capacity for self-awareness is not simply a feature of the waking state, not simply something that switches on when the eyes open and switches off when they close. It is something more fundamental, something that the brain carries with it. The philosopher Thomas Nagel wrote a famous paper in 1974 titled, "What is it like to be a bat?" His argument, which has been enormously influential in philosophy of mind, was that there is something it is like to be a conscious creature, some subjective quality to experience that cannot be fully captured by any physical description of the brain's activity. Lucid dreaming adds an interesting dimension to this question, because in a lucid dream there is clearly something it is like to be the dreamer. The experience is vivid and present and fully inhabited, and yet the entire environment of that experience, every color, every sound, every sensation, is generated by the dreamer's own brain, with no input from the external world. The qualia of the dreamer's own brain are entirely internally generated. They are not responses to an outside reality. They are, in the most literal sense, the brain creating experience from nothing but its own. This is not, of course, entirely different from what the brain does in waking life. The colors we see, the sounds we hear, the sensations we feel, these are not the world as it is. They are the brain's model of the world, constructed from sensory data according to its own interpretive frameworks. The difference between dreaming and waking is not that one is constructed and the other is not. Both are constructions. The difference is that in waking, the construction is tightly constrained by ongoing sensory input from the external world. In dreaming, that constraint is lifted and the brain Lucid dreaming sits at the intersection of these two modes. The dreamer knows the construction is happening. They are aware that what surrounds them is a product of their own mind. And yet the experience is no less vivid for that knowledge. The colors do not fade because you know they are dreamed. The air does not feel less real because you understand it is imaginary. The lucid dream is a reminder that the vividness of experience, the sense of reality that accompanies our moment-to-moment awareness, is not a property of the external world. It is a property of consciousness itself. This is, perhaps, the deepest thing that the science and history of lucid dreaming has to offer. Not a technique, not a therapy, not a curiosity about the sleeping brain, but a window. A small, clear window into the nature of what it means to be aware at all. The Indian Upanishads knew this. The Tibetan monks knew it. Aristotle glimpsed it. Van Eden named it. Laberge measured it. Awareness exists. Even in the dark. Even in the deep. Even now, as your thoughts begin to grow softer and less sequential, as the boundary between this narration and the quiet of your own mind becomes less distinct, the brain behind your eyes is preparing for its ancient work. This is sleep arriving. Not as an absence, but as a different kind of presence. The brain does not stop when you sleep. It changes. It turns inward. It begins the long, patient work of the night. Whatever happens in your dreams tonight will be the product of this same extraordinary machinery. The same brain that navigated your day, that held your worries and your small pleasures and your unresolved thoughts, will now take all of that material and work with it in its own way. It will find connections you did not know were there. It will revisit emotions from a slightly different angle. It will tell itself stories using the characters and landscapes it knows best, which are the characters and landscapes of your own life. And somewhere in all of that, there may be a moment of recognition, or there may not. And that is equally good. The dreaming mind does not need to be witnessed to do its work. It has been doing this work night after night for your entire life, mostly without your knowledge. It is patient and capable and entirely on your side. The monks of the 8th century who practiced dream yoga did not believe that lucid dreaming was better than ordinary dreaming. They believed it was a different door into the same vast space. The space of the mind, which is larger than any of us tend to assume, and quieter and more generous and more full of its own kind of light. That space is where you are going now. Whether you walk into it with awareness or simply drift into it without, you are going somewhere that has been waiting for you all day. Somewhere that is entirely yours, somewhere that no one else can follow and no one else can take from you. The day has done what it could. It has been whatever it has been. Now it is the night's turn. There is a researcher named Brigitte Holzinger, based in Vienna, who has spent much of her career studying the intersection of lucid dreaming and psychotherapy. She describes the lucid dream as a kind of inner theatre, a space in which the dreamer can become both the actor and the director. And she has written, with considerable warmth, about the way this dual role can shift a person's relationship to their own inner life. When you are both inside the story and aware that it is a story, you are no longer simply subject to it. You are also, in some small way, its author. This is a beautiful image to carry into sleep. The idea that the dreaming mind is not simply something that happens to you, but something that, in its deepest expression, is you. The author and the story. The dreamer and the dream. the awareness and the world it is aware of, held together in the same soft space behind your closed eyes. Paul Foley, the German psychologist who developed the reflection technique in the 1970s, wrote about something he called the lucid dream ego. He observed that the sense of self within a lucid dream was not simply a copy of the waking self, it was something subtly different. Lighter, perhaps. Less burdened by the accumulated weight of self-concept and social role and the thousand small obligations that the waking self carries. The lucid dream ego was, in his description, more fluid, more open to the unexpected, more willing to be surprised. There is something restful in that image. The idea of a version of you that is still you, still recognizably and essentially you, but lighter. A self that has set down some of its weight for the night and moves through the dream landscape with a little more ease. That lightness is available to you now as you drift towards sleep, not as something you need to achieve or practice or earn, simply as what happens when the day releases its hold and the body grows heavy and the mind begins its slow journey inward. The weight of the day can stay on the surface. It does not need to follow you down. Somewhere in the long history of human dreaming, which stretches back before writing, before language as we know it, before any of the frameworks through which we currently understand the mind, there were people lying in the dark just as you are lying now, feeling the same heaviness in their limbs, feeling the same softening at the edges of thought, and their dreaming minds were doing the same work that yours will do tonight. Building worlds, finding connections. We are part of a very long lineage of sleepers, a lineage that stretches back through every generation of human beings who ever lived, and further back than that into the animal ancestors from whom we inherited this ancient capacity. And yet, for all its antiquity, it is still not fully understood. The sleeping brain is still, in many ways, the great unexplored territory of neuroscience. We have mapped a great deal of it. We have learned an enormous amount in the past 50 years. But the full picture of what happens in the sleeping mind, what it is doing and why, and what it means for the nature of consciousness, is still being assembled. That is, in its own way, a comforting thought. The mystery is intact, and you are about to enter it again as you do every night, as you have done every night of your life. The brain grows quieter now. The thoughts are beginning to lose their edges. The words are becoming less distinct, more like shapes than sentences, more like weather moving through than ideas that need to be followed. This is the threshold, the place between waking and sleeping, which the ancient Greeks called the hypnagogic state, and which is itself a fascinating region of the mind, full of its own imagery and its own strange logic. The images that arise here, the faces, the fragments of landscape, the brief scenes that flicker at the edge of consciousness as sleep arrives, are the dreaming mind beginning its work. The first tentative constructions. If you notice them, let them come. They are not asking anything of you. They are simply the mind loosening its grip on the day and beginning to move in its own direction. Let it go where it wants to go. You have nowhere else to be. The monks and the machines, the journals and the laboratories, the philosophers and the dreamers, all of them have pointed toward the same place. The vast, patient, ancient space of sleep. It has been here all along, waiting for you at the end of every day, faithful as breathing, deep as anything you have ever known. The words are growing soft now. Softer than words usually are, more like something heard from a great distance, or from the next room, or from the far edge of a dream that is already beginning somewhere behind your eyes. You don't need to hold on to any of this. It will still be here, or something like it will, whenever you come back to it. But right now, there is nothing to hold on to, nothing to remember, nothing to carry. Just the dark and the quiet and the slow, unhurried arrival of sleep. The dreaming mind is patient. It will wait until you are ready. And when you are ready, it will begin. And so we leave it there. Somewhere behind you, the day is already very distant, already dissolving into something softer than memory. Let it stay there in that soft distance. The night knows what to do with you. Drift now, if you are ready. Well, there is one more thing worth carrying into the dark with you. Something small and quiet that tends to get lost in the larger stories of laboratories and ancient traditions, and the remarkable machinery of the sleeping brain. It is simply this. Every lucid dream that has ever been recorded, every signal sent from inside sleep, every account written in a dream journal or reported to a researcher or whispered between monks in a monastery, began with someone paying attention. Not dramatic attention, not the effortful concentration of an examination or a difficult task, but the soft, patient attention of someone who found their own inner life genuinely interesting, who looked at the ordinary experience of dreaming and thought quietly. That quality of attention, gentle and sustained and without agenda, is something that exists in you already. It is what brought you here tonight, to this quiet hour, to this particular exploration. You did not need to be convinced that the sleeping mind was worth spending time with. Something in you already knew it. The dream researchers and the meditating monks and the French sinologist with his decades of careful notes, they were all, at their core, people who paid attention. Who did not rush past the experience of waking inside a dream or dismiss it as a curiosity. Who sat with it, turned it over, followed it as far as it would go. You can do the same. Not tonight, not as a task or an assignment, but simply as an ongoing openness. A willingness to notice what your dreaming mind offers you, morning by morning, in those first soft moments before the day has fully arrived. Before the thoughts of the day crowd in and the dream memories dissolve like frost in early light. The dream journal that Saint-Denis kept for 20 years began with a single entry, a single morning when a 13-year-old boy decided to write down what he had dreamed. He had no idea at that moment that he was beginning something that would transform his relationship to his own mind. He was simply paying attention to something that seemed worth noticing. That is always how it begins. With a single, quiet act of attention. The Tibetan teachers who developed dream yoga had a phrase, or something that translates approximately as this, for the state they were trying to cultivate. They called it recognition. Not the recognition of something new, but the recognition of something that had always been there. The awareness that was present even in the depths of sleep, that had never actually been absent, that was simply waiting to be noticed. Recognition. A beautiful word for it. Not discovery, not achievement, not mastery. Just the quiet act of recognizing something you already, in some sense, knew. The brain behind your eyes has been dreaming since before you could speak. It has been building worlds in the dark since the very earliest nights of your life, working with whatever it had available, images and sounds and feelings and the half-formed shapes of experience. It has been doing this work faithfully, without fail, every single night. It has never asked for your attention or your acknowledgement. It has never asked for your attention or your acknowledgement. It has simply done what it does in the deep hours while you were otherwise occupied with the business of being alive. Tonight, you've spent some time with it, with its history, its mechanisms, its possibilities. You've heard something of the long conversation that human beings have been having with the dreaming mind across thousands of years and dozens of cultures in languages and frameworks and traditions that have almost nothing else in common. And what they have all found, every one of them, is that the dreaming mind is worth the attention. That there is something there in the dark behind the eyes that is genuinely remarkable. That the sleeping brain is not simply absent, not simply waiting, but actively, ceaselessly, beautifully engaged in something that we are. That is the thought to carry with you now, if you want to carry anything at all. Not a technique, not a theory, not a piece of information to be retrieved and deployed. Just a quiet sense of something worth noticing. A gentle curiosity about the world that waits for you on the other side of sleep. The body is heavy now. The thoughts are slow and soft and far apart. The room is still. The dreaming mind is ready when you are. It has always been ready. Before we close this documentary, there is something important to mention about what follows. When this hour ends, you will hear the audio shift. The narration will stop. What begins is an 8-hour brainwave entrainment program produced by our sister channel, Brainwave Lab. The frequencies in that program were not chosen arbitrarily. The team at Brainwave Lab researches peer-reviewed scientific papers, studies published in journals like Nature Neuroscience, Frontiers in Human Neuroscience, and the National Institutes of Health, to determine the precise Hertz values that EEG research shows are most effective. For this program, as we have discussed tonight, that means a 40 Hertz gamma signal timed to arrive at each REM cycle. The same frequency that triggered lucid dreams in 70% of participants in the Frankfurt University study. If you find tonight's program helpful, Brainwave Lab publishes dedicated sleep and focus audio programs regularly. You will find the full library there. Now, get comfortable. Close your eyes when the program begins. The science will do the rest.